first road that lay before him, and walked on, noticing little, immersed in his own thoughts. More than an hour passed before the necessity of turning back entered his mind. As soon as the idea occurred to him, he consulted his watch, and determined to retrace his steps so as to be at the house in good time to meet Allan on his return. 10 minutes of walking brought him back to a point at which three roads met, and one moment's observation of the place satisfied him that he had entirely failed to notice at the time by which of the three roads he had advanced. No signpost was to be seen. The country on either side was lonely and flat, intersected by broad drains and ditches. Cattle were grazing here and there, and a windmill rose in the distance above the pollard willows that fringed the low horizon. But not a house was to be seen, and not a human creature appeared on the visible perspective of any one of the three roads. Midwinter glanced back in the only direction left to look at, the direction of the road along which he had just been walking. There, to his relief, was the figure of a man, rapidly advancing toward him, of whom he could ask his way. The figure came on, clad from head to foot in dreary black, a moving blot on the brilliant white surface of the sun brightened road. He was a lean, elderly, miserably respectable man. He wore a poor old black dress coat, and a cheap brown wig, which made no pretense of being his own natural hair. Short black trousers clung like attached old servants round his wizened legs, and rusty black gaiters hid all they could of his knobbed, ungainly feet. Black crape added its mite to the decayed and dingy wretchedness of his old beaver hat. Black mohair, in the obsolete form of a stock, drearily encircled his neck and rose as high as his haggard jaws. The one morsel of color he carried about him was a lawyer's bag of blue serge, as lean and limp as himself. The one attractive feature in his clean shaven, weary old face was a neat set of teeth as honest as his wig, which said plainly to all inquiring eyes, "We pass our nights on his looking glass, and our days in his mouth." All the little blood in the man's body faintly reddened his fleshless cheeks as Midwinter advanced to meet him, and asked the way to Thorpe Ambrose. His weak, watery eyes looked hither and thither in a bewilderment painful to see. If he had met with a lion instead of a man, and if the few words addressed to him had been words expressing a threat instead of a question, he could hardly have looked more confused and alarmed than he looked now. For the first time in his life, Midwinter saw his own shy uneasiness in the presence of strangers reflected, with tenfold intensity of nervous suffering, in the face of another man, and that man old enough to be his father. "Which do you please to mean, sir, the town or the house? I beg your pardon for asking, but they both go by the same name in these parts." He spoke with a timid gentleness of tone, an ingratiatory smile, and an anxious courtesy of manner, all distressingly suggestive of his being accustomed to receive rough answers in exchange for his own politeness from the persons whom he habitually addressed. "I was not aware that both the house and the town went by the same name," said Midwinter. "I meant the house." He instinctively conquered his own shyness as he answered in those words, speaking with a cordiality of manner which was very rare with him in his intercourse with strangers. The man of miserable respectability seemed to feel the warm return of his own politeness gratefully. He brightened and took a little courage. His lean forefinger pointed eagerly to the right road. "That way, sir," he said, "and when you come to two roads next, please take the left one of the two. I'm sorry I have business the other way, I mean in the town. I should have been happy to go with you and show you. Fine summer weather, sir, for walking. You can't miss your way if you keep to the left. Oh, don't mention it! I'm afraid I have detained you, sir. I wish you a pleasant walk back, and good morning." By the time he had made an end of speaking, under an impression apparently that the more he talked the more polite he would be, he had lost his courage again. He darted away down his own road, as if Midwinter's attempt to thank him involved a series of trials too terrible to confront. In 2 minutes more, his black retreating figure had lessened in the distance till it looked again what it had once looked already, a moving blot on the brilliant white surface of the sun brightened road. The man ran strangely in Midwinter's thoughts while he took his way back to the house. He was at a loss to account for it. It never occurred to him that he might have been insensibly reminded of himself when he saw the plain traces of past misfortune and present nervous suffering in the poor wretch's face. He blindly resented his own perverse interest in this chance foot passenger on the high road, as he had resented all else that had happened to him since the beginning of the day. "Have I made another unlucky discovery?" he asked himself impatiently. "Shall I see this man again, I wonder? Who can he be?" Time was to answer both those questions before many days more had passed over the inquirer's head. Allan had not returned when Midwinter reached the house. Nothing had happened but the arrival of a message of apology from the cottage. Major Milroy's compliments, and he was sorry that Mrs. Milroy's illness would prevent his receiving Mr. Armadale that day. It was plain that Mrs. Milroy's occasional fits of suffering or of ill temper created no more transitory disturbance of the tranquillity of the household. Drawing this natural inference after what he had himself heard at the cottage nearly 3 hours since, Midwinter withdrew into the library to wait patiently among the books until his friend came back. It was past 6 o'clock when the well known hearty voice was heard again in the hall. Allan burst into the library in a state of irrepressible excitement, and pushed Midwinter back unceremoniously into the chair from which he was just rising, before he could utter a word. "Here's a riddle for you, old boy!" cried Allan. "Why am I like the resident manager of the Augean stable, before Hercules was called in to sweep the litter out? Because I have had my place to keep up, and I have gone and made an infernal mess of it. Why don't you laugh? By George, he doesn't see the point. Let's try again. Why am I like the resident manager—" "For God's sake, Allan, be serious for a moment!" interposed Midwinter. You don't know